Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I'm very excited to have on a guest who's been on here just a few months ago, Ed Goble, who actually was one of the
Mm,
originators of the Heartlander theory. He's since moved away from that and has come up with a new model, which we discussed in our previous episode, and was involved with Fair Mormon for a while. And of course, is somebody who's written many books, and he's doing some great work that will be coming out next year about the Book of Abraham. But today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about evolutionary theory and Latter-day Saint and the Latter-day Saint tradition, and how some Latter-day Saints perceive people who believe in evolution may not be in a very fair light. Ed Goble, welcome to the program.
thank you. Good to be here.
So Ed,
Good
you
to be
reached out
here.
to me because you
Mhm,
basically told me that there's a lot of people that attack people in the faith tradition that actually
mhm,
accept the if you will, the biological realities of evolution. I mean that it's
mhm.
pretty much consent. The consensus is that human evolution did occur in the scientific community, and there are many
Right.
many very good evangelical Christians like Francis Collins. He believes in evolution. William Lane Craig, who's one of the top Christian apologists, believes in human evolution. So this is not a situation in which only atheists believe in evolution and Christians believe in creation. It's actually much more
Yep.
nuanced and interesting. And sometimes what happens is because in the culture wars that we live in, if you choose a particular side on one issue, then that checks off a bunch of boxes, and you're an apostate, you're of the devil,
Mhm.
and that happens in my
Yeah.
community, unfortunately, and it's seeped into your community as well. Now, it's so interesting because
Yep.
young Earth creationism is a very new thing that made its way into the scene actually in the 1920s, really when it became mainstream. But they all
Mhm.
stem from visions that Ellen White had in the 19th century, who was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventist religion. And basically, young Earth creationism, as we understand it here in the 21st century, has its roots in one, the 19th century. Does that sound familiar? Yes,
Mhm.
a lot of our
Mhm.
roots are there and also that it comes stems from Seventh Day Adventism. So this is a group that traditionally is kind of viewed outside of Christian Orthodoxy, although they have since mainstreamed and are considered in some quarters to be a mainstream, conventional Christian church. But
Mhm.
that's kind of where it stems from. So it's kind of an interesting story because young Earth creationism is actually younger than the Restoration. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Ed,
And
you reached out to me, and I thought this would make for an interesting conversation. I've had stuff with Mike Perry, who's one of the leading evolutionist YouTubers who gets funded by the National Science Foundation. He was on a couple years ago to talk about evolution, and so I think it's
Mhm.
really important
Mhm.
for us to have these adult conversations and also be respectful of people that may have views that are differing than yours. So, Ed,
That's
welcome,
right.
and I'd love for you to kind of share with the audience some of your thoughts on this matter.
Thanks. Yeah. Part of the reason that I'm on is because I had recent conversations at some conferences that I attended, and you know, I've always felt the same way, but that is during the since the time that I converted to be an evolutionist, that is, I've always felt the same way. But in recent times, it's just become a lot more concerning because I'm running into a lot of other people that just seem to have these same attitudes. It seems like some of them online, and like I say, some of them that I've run into in conferences and so forth. And a lot of it stems, from the history of in the LDS Church, how there's been two strains of belief. Mostly uh, kind of an old Earth, somewhat evolution strain of belief all the way back since the 19 teens and 20s and so forth from certain authorities, and then you have that other strain of belief that's kind of more scriptural literalism based. So in that way, it kind of there's certain authorities that took really strong positions on one side or the other. Some of them kind of not so not so much, kind of not so extreme on those different positions, right? So probably what I ought to start out with is if I could share my
Yeah, and
screen.
before you share
Yeah.
the screen, Ed,
Oh, yeah.
and I think it's important to share that what these authorities, general authorities, were saying is that
Yeah.
you had said you converted to evolutionism in one sense. So, in
Yeah.
other words, there was a time when where you would describe yourself as a creationist.
Oh, I would, yeah, I mean, but I was kind of more old Earth because my father was, he took some geology and so forth, but we were very anti-evolution.
Okay.
Um,
So
so
old Earth creationist,
yeah,
anti-evolutionist. That would have been your position that you would have. That was what.
yeah, I mean, but not, kind of, there wasn't exactly I wasn't really set so much on like the no death before Adam thing in
Mhm.
all of creation. It was more like Adam was set apart somehow from the rest of creation. Whatever happened before,
Mhm.
um, and yeah, so I was very anti-evolution up until about 2010,
Okay.
11, something like that. And
Okay.
so I know the arguments of that they make because I used them, right? I mean,
Mhm.
against evolution.
Right.
So I converted pretty much because I came across these statements that showed that the LDS Church really has no position, and
Right.
there was these different schools of
And,
thought. Go right
yeah, and I
ahead.
want you to share that. And I also just want to tell people too, just a little
Mhm.
about that background. I was raised as a young Earth creationist, and actually ended up kind of shifting away from biblical literalism before I then became an atheist. And when I became at my transitionary period of time becoming an atheist, of course, I read the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse books that came out in the mid aughts, and I read a bunch of books about biological evolution. So I made a point to try to understand what evolution was all about and realized that what I was being taught as a young Earth creationist was not an accurate representation of the theory. It was a distorted one. And also that it was made to be like anybody who believes in the evolution is of the devil. That was kind of the mantra that I grew up with, realizing there's many good Christian people and many good atheist people that are
Mhm.
accept the theory of evolution. So, without any further ado, why don't you talk about some of these quotes?
All right. Well, let me uh, share the screen here. Let's see if I.
There we go.
All
Okay.
right. So to start out with, I just kind of want to show how there was a number of people that were, pretty high up in the hierarchy here that were believers in old Earth, evolution to a degree. Um, some of them, like B.H. Roberts, for example, he actually authored a book that I'll show later. And this book is called The Truth, the Way, the Life, and it has his position on pre-Adamites, as they were called. This kind of refers to any species, any man-like species that might have existed prior to Adam, right? So he was a believer in that. Um, there was James Talmage, John Widsoe, Joseph F. Merrill, Henry Eyring, and David O. McKay. And so they all kind of had the old Earth, somewhat leaning towards evolution, favorable towards evolution. David O. McKay, on the other hand, he was full blown evolutionist, even during the time that he was the president of the church. In his private beliefs, he just never taught those as church doctrine.
Okay. And is that covered in
So,
Derek Princess's biography of him? Does it?
yeah, I
Okay, good.
actually have a quote from that. Oh, and I forgot, I guess I forgot to mention Orson Hyde, which was back in the time of Brigham Young.
Okay.
He was in favor of these theories about pre-Adamites. So because some of that evidence, started appearing around that time period, right?
Okay.
Um, and so let's go to this. So some of the most vocal of the brethren that were against evolution and old Earth and death before Adam. There was Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie, Harold B. Lee, Marky Peterson, Ezra Taft Benson. The list goes on, but these were some of the most vocal ones, right? And you can see that some of them are presidents of the church, but again, on the side of old earth and evolution, we had a president of the church, we had apostles,
Mhm.
so it's not like they have this or that. It's not like that side has some uh they don't have the highest. I mean, there was really high people in high stations on both sides, right, at various
So there was a
but
diversity of thought and opinion on this, and they were all able to get along with each other, I guess is one way to look at it as well in that sense. Maybe not
they
all the
kind
time,
of
but in
did.
general.
Yeah, they kind of did. um yeah, they made it work somehow, right?
Somehow, yes, they did. Yep.
So here's a quotation from the 1909 First Presidency Statement. Okay, and this is pretty interesting because it was also reprinted in the February 2002 Ensign.
Hmm.
Okay, and so I've got some of this highlighted, because some of the more important parts, right? It is held by some that Adam was not the first man upon this earth, and that the original human being was a development from lower orders of the animal creation. These, however, are theories of men. And so skipping down, right? Um, let's see, true it is that the body of man enters into its career as a tiny germ embryo which becomes an infant, quickened at a certain stage by the spirit whose tabernacle it is, and the child, after being born, develops into a man. There is nothing in this, however, to indicate that the original man, the first of our race, began life as anything less than a man or less than the human germ or embryo that becomes a man. So that's pretty clear that it's pretty anti-evolution from that particular statement. There was a 1925 statement that just kind of reiterated the same thing, and almost said the same type of thing. So I'm not quoting that. And then there was a controversy back and forth, and I'll stop sharing for a minute to kind of go into this a little bit. And it was all over this book right here.
Okay.
The
Because that's
truth,
Steve Roberts introduced the idea of pre-Adamites in that book.
yes. So he was quoting Orson Hyde in this
Quoting
book.
Orson Hyde. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. And so they were having readings in the um the apostles and the committees that do this. They were having readings of this book, and they brought up all these objections, right? And so Elder Roberts, he didn't want to back down, and he just kept writing letters to the first presidency and saying, no, this isn't right, and then uh, Joseph Fielding Smith, on the other hand, he was saying, in when he would give addresses and so forth, he would say, um, you know, anybody that's preaching this stuff about, the possibility of men, uh, existing before the time of Adam or man-like beings of any kind, you can know that they're not teaching the position of the church. And so he sent, letters to or that is, Elder Roberts sent letters to the first presidency saying, why are you allowing this? He shouldn't be, making these dogmatic final statements as if he's representing the position of the church. You shouldn't be allowing this to happen, because then people get the wrong idea, because there was these, like I say, these kind of two different strains of belief.
And if
So
you don't mind, I would like to kind of just talk a little bit about paralleling it a little bit with what's going on in the country at the time, as well as
yeah.
with the evangelical world. So right around this time, you have
Mhm.
two developments. First of all, you have the Schofield Reference Bible that becomes really popular and introduces the idea of a gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, which
Mhm.
many old Earth creationists at the time used to say that basically there was a gap of time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 that could literally be
Mhm.
billions, perhaps billions of years. That was kind of introduced into Christian fundamentalism and stuff like that. But then you had George McCready Price, the Seventh Adventist geologist in the 1920s, started basically coming up with a scientific explanation for Noah's flood as an explanation for the geological column. And so that was kind of the birthing of that movement as well. What we also have during this period of time was in like 1909, the first presidency, right about the same time, there was a group of fundamentalists that got, oh, no, they weren't called fundamentalists at the time. They were a group of Bible believers who came up
Mhm.
with this series of book called The Fundamentals. And one of those things was
Mhm.
the fundamentals was it was anti-evolution, but I was also open to old Earth creationism too. It really it's the Seventh Day
Mhm.
Adventist stuff in the 1920s that starts influencing the evangelical world to embrace, starting in the 1950s with Whitcomb's Genesis Flood, that was using George McCready's work. So I just wanted to kind of parallel at the
Mhm.
same time that we had controversial. We had some people that are old Earth, some that were new Earth, I mean young Earth, others that believed in evolution. And then, of course, in the 1920s, we have what is called the Scopes monkey trial, in which William
Mhm.
Jennings Bryan was essentially arguing not a young Earth creationist, but he was arguing against evolution should not be taught in the Tennessee textbooks, high school textbooks. And at the time, of course, part of the reason why William Jennings Bryan was so opposed to it was because what he was experiencing was when he was Secretary of State, when he saw what was happening in World War One, and the idea of having, evolution had really influenced the Germans, and but more importantly, social Darwinism was really big then too.
Mhm.
And so he saw some of the negatives that was coming out of the social Darwin movement and tied it into the evolutionary theory. I just wanted to kind of give a little broader background on what's happening in the country, while at the same time also in the evangelical world, paralleling pretty well with what's happening in the rest in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the I should also say that some of these brethren that were sort of, leaning towards evolution, they wouldn't go all the way most of the time. They would say, well, there's these other forms, but we're, for example, BH Roberts, he was saying, with the pre-Adamites, there must have been some sort of cataclysm, right? Something that wiped out all these other forms of man-like beings. And then, he was interpreting the statement in Genesis where it says replenish the earth,
Yes.
right, as saying, okay, we're, in the sense of refilling it with,
Right.
so
Right. In other words, yeah, it
there
implies that there
was,
was like he created the earth and then there was a cataclysm
yeah.
in billions of years. And some people had actually, on my side have speculated that was when Satan was tossed out, he came to earth and that's what led to the destruction. And then
Oh, that's interesting.
creation. Yeah, that actually even
Yeah.
I've heard that Satan was responsible for creating the dinosaurs and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah. So, let me just kind of bring up the share again. Okay. So can you see that now?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, so this is the 1931 first presidency statement, and this was kind of responding to all that was going on, this debate going back and forth between Joseph Fielding Smith and um, uh, Elder Roberts. And so after they had presented their various sides, right, the first presidency made this statement. This was kind of a memo to all the general authorities, right? And they said the statement made by Elder Smith that the existence of pre-Adamites is not a doctrine of the church is true. It is just as true that the statement there were not pre-Adamites upon the earth is not a doctrine of the church. Neither side of the controversy has been accepted at all. So that shows, how they started getting this feeling of, I mean, I think they already had it to some degree, in terms of neutrality, not taking a side on some of this. Some of the brethren were that way, but this is when the story started really forming this notion of kind of a neutrality towards all this, right? Um, in an official way. Upon the fundamental doctrines of the church, we are all agreed. Our mission is to bear the message of the restored gospel to the people of the world, leave geology, biology, archaeology, and anthropology, no one of which has to do with the salvation of the souls of mankind, to scientific research while we magnify our calling in the realm of the church.
Oh, that's a very wise statement, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. And, because it opens it up to where you can say, no, my beliefs are not of the devil. They're just another belief. They're just, they're not the same as yours, but you can think your way, I can think mine. Nobody's gonna lose temple recommends or whatever over this, right?
Mhm.
Um, but but that wasn't, but the one side that believes in the young earth creationism, they just, they were getting overbearing, they were getting, real vocal. And so that attitude just seems to have continued throughout the whole last 100 years almost.
Yeah.
And those attitudes rubbed off, because they became the most vocal, the most prolifically published, um, you know and so after that, like I say, there was a speech, that um, or there was other speeches that Joseph Fielding Smith was giving, and there was things being printed in the Deseret News back and forth. And then James E. Talmage decided that, he needed to speak up because, it was mostly Elder Roberts at the time that was kind of at the forefront of all this, right?
Okay.
So James E. Talmage, he gave this speech called "The Earth and Man." Okay, and these are some of the interesting parts of it. The oldest, that is to say, the earliest rocks thus far identified in land masses reveal the fossilized remains of once living organisms, plant and animal. The coal strata upon which the world of industry so largely depends are essentially but highly compressed and chemically changed vegetable substance. The whole series of chalk deposits and many of our deep sea limestones contain the skeletal remains of animals. These lived and died age after age while the earth was yet unfit for human habitation. Let us not try to wrest the scriptures in an attempt to explain away what we can not explain. The opening chapters of Genesis and scriptures related thereto were never intended as a textbook of geology, archaeology, earth science, or man science. Holy scripture will endure, whereas the conceptions of men change with new discoveries. We do not we do not show reverence for the scriptures when we misapply them through faulty interpretation. I love that.
Mhm.
Um, but you can see that even though he leaned towards evolution, um, he was siding with B.H. Roberts, kind of where he was saying, I do not regard Adam as related to, certainly not as descended from the Neanderthal and so forth. So it was that idea, either something happened or there was just something where, they don't have anything to do with each other. Right. So that was kind of the idea that a lot of them had. And then, if anybody wonders just how official was this, this this was authorized by the first presidency to be published.
Okay.
So this is from the Heber J. Grant Journal, um, November 17th, 1931. At 11:30 Brother James E. Talmage called, and we went over his address in the tabernacle a couple of weeks ago and authorized its publication, and also gave authorization for it to be printed in the same form as the radio addresses for distribution. And so, the young earth creationists in the church, they say, oh, well, it was just, these two authorities. They're kind of referring to James E. Talmage and John Widsoe. I was saying that those are two of the apostles that were also scientists. You know, um, Joseph F. Merrill wasn't as vocal, but um, these guys try to say, oh, it's just those two. Well, I mean, here we're saying, look at this evidence. This was actually authorized to be published by the highest authorities in the church. So, they weren't so much taking sides as they were saying, okay, both sides, ought to have the opportunity, to kind of voice things and so forth. Um, so as time went on, these guys that were all in favor of old earth and evolution, a lot of them started to die off, these ones that were the most vocal. I mean, there were still some around, but they were just the most vocal. So so people that were kind of younger at the time, like Joseph Fielding Smith, he decided that everything had kind of opened up because he didn't get as much opposition.
Okay.
So he wrote this book. Uh, I I should have remembered to grab that one too because I have it in my basement. I forgot to get it, but it's called "Man, His Origin and Destiny,"
Okay.
and that book, um, you know, has all of these positions that he was previously taking. Plus, uh, he quotes a lot of these, Protestant and evangelical apologists, that claim to be scientists and so forth, right?
Right.
And so at the time, David O. McKay, this was around, was it 1954 or so that Joseph Fielding Smith published that book. And, there were, to be fair, there were some apostles, in the quorum that were, suggesting that he write that book and publish it, so it wasn't just him, right? But so a lot of stuff was going on where people were assuming that this was the official, uh, you
Right.
know,
And so
doctrine of the church.
this professor who contacted, what university was he with? That this Professor William Lee Stokes.
University of Utah, if I
Okay.
remember right.
And so he
Yeah,
contacted the first presidency about this book.
that's
And
right. This
okay,
was
so
in 1957, right?
1957. Okay, so
Well, actually, this was, um, if I remember right, was it the time that maybe it was when David O. McKay was prophet at the time. I don't know if he was just prophet or I,
1957.
I should.
David O. McKay was president in 1957. Yes.
Okay. So there you go. I just wanted to make sure I had my facts right
Yeah,
because
he was president.
I
I think he
I
became
didn't
president
have
in
enough.
48, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't have enough time to go back and revisit everything in the timeline.
But,
But yeah, so this was a really significant statement because, yeah, like you said, this, William Stokes, he sends a letter inquiring, and David O. McKay answers, and he says, on the subject of organic evolution, the church has officially taken no position. The book Man, His Origin and Destiny was not published by the church and is not approved by the church. The book contains expressions of the author's views for which he alone is responsible.
okay.
Okay. Then, you know, there was a lot of stuff where people were accusing this guy of saying you shouldn't have been, publishing this and so forth. Well, in this book, this is called The Search for Harmony. Okay. essays on science and
All
Mormonism,
right,
and
so
then
so do me
yeah.
a favor and exit out of
Mhm.
the screen share so that
Oh
people can
yeah, sure.
view the book.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yep, let's do that. And then, okay, hold on. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's okay. We'll just the essays. Oh,
So
this is part of the. Oh, I don't have that particular edition.
yeah,
I have a bunch of them here in that same series. So what's it called again?
the Search for Harmony, I think. Yeah, Search for Harmony,
Okay.
essays on science and Mormonism.
Okay, great. Well,
So
make sure
there's
you.
a lot of, this is really a cool book because it's got a lot of different, things about that goes into a lot of different aspects of this. But um, back here towards the end, there's this, it says epilogue, an official position, and this was written by William Stokes.
Okay.
and it
Okay.
and it reprints that same
Letter.
statement by, yeah, that same letter
Okay.
by
And just for folks to know that is
yeah.
part of a series of essays, books that is well
Mhm.
regarded and is published by Signature Books. So Ed, make sure you send me a link in the descriptions for people who want to check that book out. Now I've got
Yeah,
it.
will do.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll share the screen real quick again. um, so this is a quote from that particular book. So Stokes, he says, on the 13th of October, 1968, I again wrote to President McKay and asked for permission to publish the essential statements from his 1957 letter. On the 18th of October, I received a letter. Oh, I guess I have a typo there. A letter over the signature of Joseph Anderson, Secretary of the First Presidency, stating that he had been directed to tell me that there was no objection to my use of the quotation. On the subject of organic evolution, the church has officially taken no position in a book I was then writing. I have since been accused of taking unfair advantage of President McKay. Let the readers judge.
Okay.
So, you know, this is a statement, from that book that we were talking about earlier, the David O. McKay and the rise of modern Mormonism. This was according to the report of Sterling McMurrin, who was also, he was kind of a, he was a believer in evolution and, so
Yeah, and he
forth
was
and
a
so on.
leading intellectual at the time. Um,
Absolutely.
I think I think many people think that he was probably an atheist, but from my understanding, but he was a member of the church
Yeah.
and actually very good friends with David Old McKay and very influential on him too.
That's right. And this is, a quote from in private when President McKay, told him what he really thinks. I would like to know just what it is that a man must be required to believe to be a member of this church, or what it is that he is not permitted to believe and remain a member of this church. I would like to know just what that is. Is it evolution? I hope not, because I believe in evolution.
Mm.
Okay, so, and there's all these other evidences as well, not just this quote. Okay, but then then came this. I wasn't able to find the date on this one, but this
Mhm.
is Boyd K. Packer's rebuttal. Okay, he says, I should take note, and again, this is that same side where, they're very vocal. They're all kind of following in the footsteps of Joseph Fielding Smith. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with having their beliefs, nothing wrong with believing it, real intensely like they do, the scriptural literalism and so forth. It's just that for some reason, they always insist on having the upper hand, or they always did and they still do, right? They want to somehow insist that it's the actual teaching of the church. The church has no neutrality. But the problem with that is obvious. If it's the church, that has this position, it's because all of the brethren are unanimously thinking the same thing. There would be unanimity.
Hmm.
There was never unanimity. There was just always these two strains of
Yeah.
schools of thought. And so how can they say, oh, this is the position of the church, when not only did these earlier brethren say we have this, no position, we're neutral on this, neither side is the doctrine of the church. It just kept cropping up over and over again that they keep insisting, right? And this isn't to find fault with who I believe is prophets. All of them, to me, are prophets. They all hold the keys of the priesthood. I mean, this is just the human side of these
Yeah.
two sides,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I should take note, and again, this is Boyd K. Packer. I should take note of one letter signed by a president of the church addressed to a private individual. It includes a sentence which, taken out of context, reads, "On the subject of organic evolution, the church has officially taken no position." The context, from all the rest of it seems pretty clear to me,
Yeah.
especially because the person that made the statement is an evolutionist, dyed in the wool, right? Um, so he's not, and he's not even trying to push his personal belief on the church,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Um, for some reasons, the addressee passed this letter about. Well, again, that's because, as we saw here, um, he asked for permission, right? Um, he says, for some reasons, the addressee passed this letter about. For years, it has appeared each time this subject is debated. Letters to individuals are not the channel for announcing the policy of the church for several important reasons. This letter left or this letter itself is not a declaration of the position of the church, as some have interpreted it to be. Do not anchor your position on this major issue to that one sentence. It is in conflict with the two official declarations, each signed by all members of the First Presidency. Um, okay, that's one way to look at it, right? That's one of their main arguments on that side is, well, the first presidency made this statement in 1909, and the first presidency made this statement in 1925, all essentially saying the same thing, anti-evolution, right? But then they don't really talk about these things that were said in 1931 about the neutrality. They, and they don't mention the fact that this thing that Elder Talmage put out was officially authorized by the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 to have it published, right? They just, it's almost like the things went down the memory hole, and because the side was so vocal, it's a doctrine of the devil, it's evil, we've got to stamp it out, we've got to make sure that all of this, well, you know it's nice to think of it as the first presidency and everybody would come out and say in a unanimous voice, well, I mean, the position in 1931 was a unanimous voice for neutrality.
Right. So,
But then some of the young earthers that I've encountered, they'll say stuff like, um, well, that was just a memorandum to the authorities of the church. That letter didn't go out to what? I mean, if it's to the church and it's to the authorities, does it really matter? If it's put out to all the authorities, it's the policy for all the authorities to follow,
mm-hmm.
in my mind. If it's a memorandum to all, I know, you know what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
but then this gets even more interesting as we go, because that same statement, I'll come to that in a minute.
Okay. Good.
Um, but anyway, so when,
Well,
you
why don't you
know,
exit out a
when,
screen? Why don't you exit out a screen share for a bit while we're talking?
oh yeah, sure.
Okay. So,
Uh, yeah, so it's interesting that, you know, it kind of doesn't matter when it suits them on that side. I'm not trying to find fault, but again, if the statement is on their side and it's towards their point of view, it really doesn't matter, whether it was an apostle or a prophet or which way it came, whether it was a letter or whether it came from some authority giving a talk, on his own in some state conference, or, you know, what kind of like the Joseph Fielding Smith address that was given in the Genealogical Society. They quote that, and they'll say, oh, look at all these, statements, how he's making all these statements of finality, that shows that this is the doctrine of the church. But that was the point, that he wasn't even, a president of the church, but yet they point to that, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting how, no matter what, there's just this insistence on somehow they don't want it neutral because it's so clear to them, and
Right.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I get it. And then also too, it's kind of reminding of like what often happens with young Earth creationism. One of the criticisms directed towards young Earth creation is this idea of quote
Mhm.
mining, looking for
Yeah.
the quotes that bolster your position and then not maybe dealing with the context of them, you know.
Yeah, and that's I was going to bring some of that up, because that's the fallacy of cherry picking, right?
Right.
Quote only the cherry pick quotations from the church authorities that they historically agreed with, right?
Exactly.
Um, and the other problem that I see is that, a lot of them that do a lot of this kind of condemnation towards evolutionists in the church, they have no authority to do so themselves. They don't have keys of the priesthood. They're just kind of following in the footsteps of these authorities that were so vocal and were so condemnatory. They throw up a pile of objections against all authoritative statements that they don't like so that they can ignore them, so that they don't have to, you know, uh, admit that they have any kind of, authority to them. Um, let's see, I'm trying to, okay, there was also the point that there's always this kind of entrenchment or reluctance, right? It's like this, they've got to have this, they've got to dig in their heels. There's always this reluctance. It's really similar to the kind of thinking and the kind of way that people argue for, people that prefer to think that Joseph Smith was not responsible for polygamy, right? They, it's the same kind of tactics, same kind of strategies. It's all emotion based. They're unwilling to consider new information. They're unwilling to, you know, work or take that into consideration to work it into their personal beliefs. They think that all the thought has already been done. All the thinking has already been done by, this side, right? Um, but when you're trying to come to some kind of harmony that and form an opinion on your own, that actually takes work. That you actually have to think about it to decide if you want to believe these different strains of what it is that you want to pick and choose out of these different sides. um yeah, so also the lack of willingness to accept the possibility of other people's points of view. There's um, demonization of their opponents. No matter what, they've got to say Darwin was of the devil, right? Darwin, he established the kingdom of the devil in the last days, right? And then they tried to link that up with eugenics and communism, Nazism, just
Right.
because those guys, Hitler and the Russian communists and so forth, and the Chinese communists, just because that kind of fit in an atheist worldview, you know, that somehow that means that Darwin was an evil guy, right? Just because Darwin, um, just because he wasn't religious, just because he stopped believing, um, is that really a reason to say that he had no inspiration from God? All other scientists in LDS tradition are, kind of given a deference where they're saying, where people say, oh, well, they obviously had, some kind of inspiration from God because they came up with all this and they invented all this stuff. Well, Darwin is the one guy that they refuse to do that for. They refuse because and is that, does that make a lot of sense though? Because just because he didn't believe, it wasn't even the worst sin that he could have committed, right? I mean, Einstein was an adulterer, yet somehow he was still inspired of God at the time that he was adulterating, right, and
Yeah, and
having
then
these flings.
Newton
um
was a magician.
yeah, Newton was an alchemist, and that's forbidden in the scriptures, that type of thing with sorcery, right? And so yet Newton was inspired of God. The only thing that Darwin ever did supposedly wrong was that he wasn't a believer in the Bible. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any, I don't know whether he, what else he might have done. I mean, but I'm just saying that, that seems to be like his biggest offense against, supposedly, as if, that makes it so that he still can't use his mind. He still can't, come up with things that are valuable,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and there's many
Um,
people in the evangelical world that have their Christian bookstores full of books like this that basically demonize Darwin as well. So
mm,
that's something that's par for the course. I know a lot of the materials that these people were using, throughout the years, they're using the evangelical young earth creationist materials to,
yeah,
so that's part
yeah.
of that story too,
And it's that kind of apologetics that Joseph Fielding Smith was drawing upon when he
Right.
wrote The Man, His Origin and Destiny. I mean,
Mhm.
so that same kind of thing, is still going on with these young earth creationists, because they go to the young earth creationist apologetics outside of the church and draw upon all that, and then they try to reinvent science itself. you
Right.
know there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with, on their side, if they want to try to reinvent science. It's just that, um, I mean, if that's what they want to believe and that's the kind of thing that they want to do, I mean, but again, they don't want to accept the fact that science itself is pretty honest. They'll say, oh, well, look at all the things like Piltdown Man, all this fraud. They'll say, oh, look, how environmental science is, influenced by all this money and everything. Well, and they'll try to find fault with the process of science. Well, a lot of this kind of stuff doesn't last, because science is self-corrective.
It's a self-correcting. The scientific
Yeah,
method,
because
like the
yeah,
Piltdown Man hoax
exactly.
was uncovered by other scientists as being a hoax. So that just goes to show that
Right,
just because there's hoaxes going on doesn't mean that it's actually the scientific rigor that disposes it as a hoax. So I think
right.
that's what you're trying to talk about is the scientific method and what's and then and how it's being employed. But not only that, but just
Mhm.
the way the confluence of all the different evidence comes together that seemingly, definitely leans in a direction, just from evidence based, towards a much older Earth than young Earthers believe in, and also the realities of biological evolution is kind of how
Mhm.
is the scientific position that's being taken. So, was there any
Yeah.
more of these slides that you wanted to share
Yeah,
too?
actually there is. I'll go
Okay,
back to
so
that real
let's
quick and
let's
finish
do
some of
some more
that off.
slides here.
Okay. So then going on, this is also going back to the McKay letter, President McKay, that letter that he sent out, that was, saying that the church has no position. This was Harold B. Lee's comment on that, right? I have a few moments, and he was responding to somebody else, apparently, that sent out a letter. I have a few moments to respond to your letter of recent date in which you express some concern about some contradictory information as to the position we should take with regard to the doctrine of evolution. Apparently, the thing that confused you was that these who have contended have shown you a copy of a letter which was signed by President David O. McKay, in which he disavowed the church having taken any official position on the subject of organic evolution. And furthermore, that in that note to Professor William Lee Stokes, he declared that the book Man, His Origin and Destiny was not published by the church and is not approved by the church. And then this is really interesting, this theory, right? It was undoubtedly the undue pressure of some of these dissidents, and he's referring to, these people that was apparently showing this letter to this person that sent him
Okay.
that letter, right? Was undoubtedly the undue pressure of some of these dissidents, one of which was his own son, who was a professor at the University of Utah, and, referring to the son of President McKay, that induced him to write this brief and to them a satisfying, but to you a disturbing note, which poured water over their wheel and tended to lessen the influence of President Joseph Fielding Smith's book. When your letter came to our attention, President Marion G. Romney told me of a conference address which he had delivered in the April conferences in 1953, where he spoke directly to this subject of the fall of Adam, or the fall of man as it is spoken of. At the conclusion of his talk, President Romney said that President David O. McKay had congratulated him and had written a brief note, a copy of which I am attaching hereto, in which he congratulated President Romney and then said, I congratulate you for your excellent contribution during the conference and express gratitude for your remarks as well as your fine spirit, and I assure you that I agreed heartily in every instance. Well, if you're being polite, I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but all the evidence is against this. All the evidence is against the idea that he agreed heartily in every instance, or literally, right? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe he's just saying something to be nice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hugh Nibley, I've heard this a lot. People would go to Hugh Nibley and he'd say, "Oh, this is great," "Oh, I love this," and then the people would leave and he'd go, "Oh, that's a pile of hooey," you know. So it's like, what is it really? Um, you know,
Okay.
and so yeah, I don't know. To me, it's something like that. So he goes on to say President McKay had made this other statement probably because of a compromising position he had been in. No, I mean, he wrote that letter back just a few days afterwards when that guy sent him the letter asking, or I mean, when William Stokes asked President McKay. That was just a couple of days later that he got the response in the mail. So, you know what I'm saying? There was no compromising position. It was, um, so then, here's another one of those evidences, right? David O. McKay, BYU 1956 speech. Whatever the subject may be, the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ may be elaborated upon without fear of anyone's objecting, and the teacher at BYU can be free to express his honest conviction regarding it, whether that subject be in geology, the history of the world, and then get this, the millions of years that it took to prepare the physical world. So this is a documented speech that he made at BYU, and he himself is saying, in his opinion, right, that it took millions of years that it took to prepare the physical world. So let's see. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So I'll stop the share for a minute again. Um, a lot of these statements that I've been showing um, are in this book. Not all of them, but most of them.
Okay, so it's called
Okay.
Mormonism and Evolution, the authoritative LDS statements. And who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that published by and edited
That's
by?
published by Koford, I think. Let me
Oh,
double
okay.
check that. Koford Books. Yep.
Yep.
This was in 2005, right?
All right.
And these are, you can see the William E. Evanson and Dwayne E. Jeffrey.
Okay.
Okay. Big time, you know, BYU professors, right? In the biology department, right? And so what this includes is the BYU evolution packet. Okay, the BYU evolution packet has a lot of these statements, including that 1909 one. So it's not just on the side of evolution and old Earth. It's
Oh, wait, just
saying,
real quick, evolution, the
yeah,
BYU evolution packet. What does that mean?
packet.
What
it's
they
a
do? We just
it's
handed
a
out the packets to the
it's
students
a
when they come into
packet that gets
freshmen.
handed out to all the students. Yeah,
Oh, really?
all the students that are in, yeah, that they give them some food for thought about what various authorities
So
said on the
all the students
subject.
are just the students still receiving this packet on
Uh,
evolution?
as far as I know,
Okay. So the church
yeah,
is okay. So the school is
yeah,
putting it
and
out there.
this
Okay.
and this this is 100% authorized by the board of trustees.
Hmm.
Guess who they are?
They're general authorities, right? Or
They're the first
first
presidency and
presidency. Yeah. So
yeah,
okay.
so they're approving of all of the content of the BYU evolution packet. See that? And so the BYU evolution packet, what does it have in it? Like I say, it has that 1909. Uh, here's the first part of it. It says BYU packet, and it has the not 1992 um, thing from the. Let's see. This was oh, wait. Okay. So this was the cover letter, I'm sorry, to the packet, right? And you can see that it says approved by, right here, if you can see it, approved by the BYU Board of Trustees, June 1992. Okay. So this has been around for some time, right? What does it have? It has that statement that we were going into, the 1909 statement by the first presidency. Okay. And it has the 1925 statement that I was talking about. It's got the um, Encyclopedia of Mormonism statement that includes that statement, from that memorandum that I mentioned from 1931. Um, it quotes that statement from let's see, sorry, that one where it says leave geology, biology, archaeology, and anthropology, no one of which has to do with the salvation of the souls of mankind, to scientific research.
That's the
While we
1931 statement. Yeah.
yeah, 1931, while we magnify our calling in the realm of the church. Well, the young earth creationists right now are saying, oh, that statement was only in reference to the pre-Adamite controversy between and that memorandum only went around to the authorities of the church at the time. Well, it's in the BYU evolution packet, and it's approved by the board of trustees, the first presidency, and who approved these
In
materials.
their BYU
Okay,
evolution packet. So
packet,
okay.
yes,
All
it's
right.
in the, yeah. And then then this book, it has other statements, that for example, that it's got the the one from Joseph Fielding Smith, so it's being fair, right? From that I was talking about, and and it's got the yeah again that memo. It kind of explains some of the background of that. Anyway, it goes, and then it's got that statement, the earth, or I mean that thing that I quoted from The Earth and Man by Elder Talmage. Okay, and so it's just a really really useful book because it goes into all this. It shows the statement from the
President Grant.
President Grant's journal. So it's that book is probably the most one of the most important ones,
Okay.
right?
Well, make sure you send me a
Uh,
link for that too,
yeah,
so
I'll
I
do
can get
that.
that into the description too, so people can check it out. I think it's really important for
Yeah.
to check the sources and
Oh
themselves,
yeah,
to educate
sure.
themselves. Yeah.
The other one that I think is really important is this one, Evolution and Mormonism, um, A Quest for Understanding. And I think this one was published by Signature, if I'm not mistaken. But this was written again by Dwayne E. Jeff or no Trent D. Stevens and D. Jeffrey Meldrum. So what's really interesting to me here,
And
I think there
Jeffrey
was a
Jeffrey Meldrum, isn't that Rob Meldrum's cousin?
yes,
Okay,
yes, he is.
that's
Yeah,
right.
Uh,
Yep.
I I got that from Rod's own lips. He told me that when I went to his house to visit.
Yep.
Which I thought was really interesting. But here's here's the really interesting thing about Dr. Meldrum is that he's that guy on all of those Bigfoot
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's the
documentaries.
Bigfoot guy. I know. That he's
Yeah,
the main and like main
uh-huh.
anthropologist that really is
Yeah.
on all the Bigfoot programs. And honestly, he's
Mhm.
applying the scientific method to Bigfoot, right?
Oh, he is, but he's a he yeah, he's an interesting character because I agree with him on evolution, but I'm a Bigfoot apostate.
Okay, got it.
I need, see, this is where I say, like I say in my beliefs about science and so forth, there's a place where a lot of this about science is appropriate. And these peripheral issues that have nothing to do with the centrality of the gospel, right? That's one. Um, but then the cryptozoology stuff. I'm sorry, but I need proof. I do because
Okay.
there's so much fraud.
All
There's just so
right.
much fraud.
Don't rain on my parade about Bigfoot. Come on.
there's just so much fraud. I
I
can't
I
I
get
can't
it. I
take
know
any
what
of
you're
it
saying.
seriously.
Yeah,
The only thing the only thing that I take seriously is the Orang Pen deck,
okay.
which is something that might be a relative to the orangutan in Indonesia, except supposedly it's like 3 feet tall and it walks on two legs most of the
Oh,
time,
okay.
right?
So,
But they suspect, like I say, it might be a relative of the orangutan.
okay.
But the thing about that gets me, that differs from Bigfoot and Yeti and all that, is that I saw a documentary on that where some actual scientists were saying, we saw this.
Okay.
We don't have footage, but we saw this thing. And I'm like, well, it seems, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of claimants to Bigfoot too, but those people had a certain amount of they didn't have reason to just all get together and lie.
All
I
right.
mean, it's kind
Well, I'm going to do a Bigfoot
yeah,
episode eventually, and I'm
sure.
hoping, especially Mormon folklore and Bigfoot too. I think is an important
Yeah,
conversation to have.
there's a guy named Matt Bauman,
Uh-huh. Yep.
that is the expert on the Bigfoot stuff and the cane stuff.
Oh,
But
good.
just, real quick on that, I know it's a tangent. So back when I was with Fair, I actually wrote one of the articles that's on their site for the cane thing.
Right, and
Uh,
just so that people
yeah,
understand, because maybe not everybody knows this, that there's this idea
yeah,
one well, part of Mormon folklore that there was an encounter that was made in the 19th century that was then led to this idea later when they were talking about Bigfoot, they tied it in, and so what was the name of the wasn't it an apostle that actually had an encounter with
yeah. Trying to remember his name because
okay
I didn't
he's right
prepare that.
he's
I
riding on
mean,
his horse and he comes across this.
Patton.
Okay, and he's riding on his horse and he comes across
Yeah,
this man that's hair from all the way is covering his whole body, and he's as tall as he is on the horse. So he's big, he's tall,
mhm.
and he's hairy. And that basically, then when the Bigfoot stuff started getting really big in the 20th century, then that kind of was part of Mormon folklore. So you wrote something about that. And the idea was
Yeah,
that this hairy person said that they were Cain, that they were cursed, and that they were he was
yeah,
roaming the earth and hairy. So
yeah.
I
So
guess
that started this, folklore thing in the church.
yes,
Where the people believe somehow that he's some kind of undead type, like not not too different, from a zombie or a vampire, like some kind of undead thing that is walking around, right? And that he's destroying the souls of men, right? And he still has his body. So it's kind of a quasi translation thing.
okay, yeah,
And but see, here's the problem that I'm like going, okay, in regular Mormon or LDS thought, and there's scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants that kind of back this up. If anybody or anything appears to you, you know,
right.
you shake hands with it or you offer to,
Hmm.
right? And so here's this thing that appeared to Elder Patton back. It must have been the 1830s, late 30s, 40s, whatever it was. And he tells him this story, right? And so he repeated it, and it was recorded before he died, before Elder Patton died. He was one of the, or if I'm getting this right, somebody can correct me if I'm not, but Elder Patton was one of the first martyrs, I think, if I remember, of the Restoration. And so it was recorded by these people who he told the story. And then you know, Spencer W. Kimball quotes it in Miracle of Forgiveness, and it just takes on this big life, of its own.
Oh, oh, that's fascinating.
So, yeah. So, but here's the problem, right? Why would you believe if this guy is supposed, like in LDS traditions, Cain is not just a sinner, he's a son of perdition in LDS, so he's a devil, he's an evil spirit if he's dead. So why would you believe anything that he says? If he says that, oh, I still have my body, I'm still alive, and I'm walking around, and I'm condemned, to be a vagabond, for eternity until the end of the earth, right? Why would you believe that? Why you didn't shake hands with it? How do you know that this guy has a body?
Okay, that's a great point to look at. Now we went
Yeah,
on our
he's a liar. Why
well,
would you believe?
okay, that's a great way to look at it, and that's
Yeah,
really interesting. Now we got on a Bigfoot tangent. Now let's get back to
yeah. I just want to point out though,
oh,
in the
sure.
book of Jasher, in the book of Jasher, there's actually a a thing where it says that Cain was real hairy, and this one guy shot him with the arrow and killed him. So, if you put any stock in those traditions that underlie the book of Jasher, it actually says Cain, that he was killed.
All right, well,
All
that's
right,
good to
yeah.
know.
So back to the evolution stuff. So this book, you know, is one of the, one to really understand it, along with this one for people that really want to know, some good
Yeah.
points of view,
So, and then let's talk about science and religion. That's
yeah.
published by the church.
Yeah, this is published by Deseret Book. I don't know that you can say it's published
Oh,
by
Deseret. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah.
the church itself, but these are
The church's
two.
publishing arm, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so it's not official, but it's very Just like the BYU evolution packet, this is one of those things that people can use to, see kind of a, a good point of view to get your thinking in the
Right.
right way towards this stuff. It doesn't mean you have to, all of this is not to say young earth creationists have to believe what evolutionists believe, like me. This is just to say, why don't you truly understand where we're coming from and not set up straw men and all this kind of, because there's this one book that I have from this one guy who really goes off on this book, and it's really, this particular book is I'm not going to mention the name of the guy here, but he just goes off on these two scholars and he says they're trying to get you. I mean, those aren't his exact words, but he says trying to get you. He's trying to get, they're trying to, it's like there's a conspiracy, you know, and I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like, this is not about us trying to convert you. This is like us just trying to like say there's no there's no position of the church. You're overbearing. You're trying to take away our freedom of religion in a sense where most people, most religions, when there's this much variance in different groups, they would just they would just like go form another religion or another church. Okay, because the LDS church is held together so tightly in terms of the belief of the keys of the priesthood, belief that we have to look to the brethren for our, um, you know, blessings and so forth, that we need to stay in line with, not go off on some, going astray in our church is about, you know, finding fault with the Lord's anointed and going off on some, creating your own religion or, whatever. But so
So what
that's
you're
to me
afraid of is
anyway.
that these people are trying to cause division in the body by basically saying that if you don't, if you accept the theory of evolution, you're actually accepting a doctrine of demons or something like that. And
Well,
that,
they are saying that you're accepting a doctrine of demons. That's one thing.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's because they're trying to create division. They're trying to entrench. They're
Okay.
trying to, you know, become, like I say, it's that, reluctance, I call it. But some people would call it fundamentalism, but I think that's an ugly word because in LDS, in our religion,
Yeah.
that's got so much baggage,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. It kind
So
of means a
reluctance,
different meaning in your tradition in many ways. Yes.
yeah,
So
reluctance and entrenchment is a better way to
yeah.
describe it, right?
And
So they're trying to defend their what's sacred to them,
right.
right?
And this is exactly
And
the same thing as an evangelical world too. They're trying,
yeah, and
it,
so it's
reaction.
understandable why they would do this. It's understandable why they would get conspiratorial,
Mhm.
because it's understandable. It isn't like something where they're trying to really go off on other members of the church, where they're trying to really find fault. It's just that those members of the church are kind of in the way because we're trying to assert our right to just exist and have our belief and also teach real science. And they say, there's in this one book, it's saying, well, all of these parents of all these, that are sending their kids to BYU, and the kids some of them are losing faith because of evolution, so they say. Well, if there hadn't have been, this kind of thing with the entrenchment and this, where the authorities that were on this side, and again, this is not finding fault, this is just an observation saying this is what they did, this is seems to be the reason why they were trying to, assert dominance because they were trying to defend what they held sacred,
Right.
right? And to them, people like B.H. Roberts and Talmage, they're clear not apostates, but they're on the wrong side in terms of this issue, right? So
Right.
they're trying to say we believe this is a doctrine of the devil. We believe that you're in the wrong. This is just me. You know, I'm not saying that I'm in their head, but this is what I observe. This is my interpretation, right?
Mhm.
And so I want to be friends with these people, but you know,
You want to be friends, but you also want to be able to have your beliefs and
yeah,
put them
I
on the
want
table,
to,
not and not feel like they're being demonized or you're being ostracized for having,
yeah,
yeah. And I think that's important for you to get that out there and share that
yeah,
message.
because
That
I'm told by many by many people that I've encountered online, and very strongly opinionated people that I've, and I won't say what conferences, but that I've multiple times come across, and I've got friends this way that still, they're friends, but they're it's like they won't go there when you try to say, just please recognize the neutrality and that you're just on one side. You're just on one side of the opinion.
right.
So if you could just make that little concession, that would fix a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
But see, like I say, those that are concerned, when their kids go and find out that there's this whole other side, and then they look at this other side and they go, well, I was taught that this was the position of the church. Why is that? Well, it's because that's what they were taught. They weren't inoculated, as John Dehlin would say, against the possibility that there's this other side.
yes, I think that's very true, and I think that's also
Yeah.
exactly the same thing happening in the evangelical world, where I tell you,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of atheist YouTubers out there were once young Earth creationist evangelical Christians who went to school
Mm-hmm.
and they were exposed to evolutionary theory, and ultimately, in many cases, became atheists as well. So I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important that you don't double down on one thing. I think it's important to
Mm-hmm.
expose kids to all the different views, all the different ideas, like multiple working hypotheses, as Jonathan Neville likes to
Exactly.
do,
Yep.
and expose them to all these different ideas so that they're not taught this is the only way. Because if that happens and they
Mm-hmm.
find information evidence that contradicts it, it often causes there to be a shelf breaking moment, and maybe they
Yes.
lose their faith moment. And so that's why you're doing this as a means to try to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
Yeah, because if parents would know in the first place and not rely on these sources like Man, His Origin and Destiny and Mormon doctrine that contain these teachings, I mean, it's okay if you want to believe that. Don't change your mind just because there's another side. You ought to understand the other side. You ought to understand the position of the church. You ought to teach your kids. Well, I mean, not to tell you what to do. This is just my opinion. You ought to teach your kids that side enough to understand and not set it up as straw men, not try to say that these statements of the church are, do everything that you can come up with to try to explain it away, and say that these just because some brethren on that side were doing it too doesn't mean that that should be persisted. That's
Right.
my opinion.
Yeah.
Before I forget, this is a really important book as well. Mormon Scientists. This is a biography to some degree of Henry Eyring, written
Oh,
by, I think it's his grandson, Henry L. I or J or J, sorry, Henry J. Eyring. I I guess I'm not really sure what exact, if he's a son of Henry B. Eyring, or but Henry B. Eyring is the son of Henry Eyring,
okay.
and Henry Eyring was um, a member of the general board of the Sunday school, so he was very prominent. He wasn't quite a general authority. He was a scientist. He was a full blown evolutionist, just like President McKay. And so it goes into a lot of the stuff that went back and forth between in their heated discussions, between elder, or I mean, sorry, uh, Brother Eyring and Joseph Fielding Smith. It's a very important book, but it also goes into a lot of the kind of thinking that I think is really important.
Oh, that's
Like,
great. Thanks for sharing that
yeah,
book. And who is that published by?
that is published by Deseret Book.
Okay, great. That's
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
that's
there's another one.
yeah. Okay,
Um,
so I know you got a few
so
more slides left.
yeah,
Why don't we go through those?
these are pretty important because they're the most recent.
Okay.
And let's go into so this appeared in the New Era. Okay. And just like the BYU evolution packet is aimed directly at the youth
Hmm.
that attend BYU,
And what year was this
this
published?
is 2016.
Okay, so this is
This is like,
2016, New
this
Era
is,
Statement. Why don't you go
yeah,
ahead and read that? But the question it says, what does the church believe about evolution? And this
right.
is right.
The church has no official position on the theory of evolution. Organic evolution, or changes to species' inherited traits over time, is a matter for scientific study. Nothing has been revealed concerning evolution. Nothing has been revealed concerning evolution. Okay, either way, though the details of what happened on Earth before Adam and Eve, including how their bodies were created, has not been revealed. That's as clear as you can get. That's saying evolution is not a revelation to the church. Young Earth creationism is not a revelation to the church. Okay, the scriptural literalism, extreme scriptural literalism, is not a revealed way necessarily to interpret the scriptures. That's what that's saying in essence. Okay, uh, including how their bodies were created, have not been revealed. Our teachings regarding man's origin are clear and come from revelation. What is it? Before we were born on earth, we were spirit children of heavenly parents. Basic Mormon doctrine, with bodies in their image, spirit bodies. Not talking about the bodies in mortality. God directed. So whatever it was, if it was evolution, if it was whatever it was with young earth creationism, okay, whatever that was, God directed. So this is, they get into all these arguments about evolution where they try to say that it's all about randomness. No, I mean, if evolution had anything to do with this, God directed it. God directed the creation of Adam and Eve and placed their spirits in their bodies. We are all descendants of Adam and Eve, our first parents who were created in God's image. This is really, really an important point, I think, because this, kind of, some evolutionists, think that human beings before the time of Adam, some evolutionists in the church that I disagree with, they believe that, human souls that are sons of God in the LDS point of view, that they were inhabiting these bodies far before Adam. No. There were no spirit children of Heavenly Father on the earth before Adam and Eve were created. What does that mean in terms of evolution? It's pretty clear. Whoever these people were, if you call them people or if you just call them man-like beings, whatever they were not. They were not spirit children of Father in heaven and Father and Mother in heaven. Okay.
Okay.
In addition, for a time they lived alone in a paradisical setting where was neither human death nor future family. They fell from that state, and this fall was an essential part of Heavenly Father's plan for us to become like Him. Okay. So that's the most clear statement I've ever seen, concise, directed towards the youth of the church. But what do? The young earth creationists, they say nobody's name is on that. No authorities take credit for that. There's no, it's not a official statement from the first presidency. Who was it that did the the BYU packet again. It was the trustees of BYU, the board of trustees. Okay, this is, you can go off on all of these and try to explain away, but see, this is the problem with Book of Abraham research in the church. This is the problem with this kind of thinking. Explaining stuff away is not going to fix this. Trying to explain away evidence is not going to resolve issues. Explaining away the Kirtland Egyptian papers is not going to fix the Book of Abraham problem. Trying to put the Kirtland Egyptian papers on W. Phelps and deny that Joseph Smith was responsible for those papers, that's not going to fix that problem. Okay, same thing here. This issue, explaining away these statements and saying that they're not official and coming up with all of this, is not going to fix this. What's going to fix this is for people to recognize that people need education. They need to be educated on all sides, regardless of what they believe. And they need to recognize that nothing's revealed, nothing's official. We're all doing our own thing. We're all privately believing what we believe.
Okay.
That's where this,
So, and you got one final statement you want to
one
hear,
final statement.
and then we'll wrap it up after
Yep,
this.
yep.
And,
Totally done here with this. So this is from the church history topics. As time went on, and there was a bunch of stuff before this, but as time went on, faithful Latter-day Saints continued to hold diverse views on the topic of evolution. Guess what that implies? Anybody that has a diverse any view, they're faithful. They can be faithful. Okay. Joseph Fielding Smith, in his influential writings, maintained the reliability of Scripture as a guide to the creation timeline. Henry Eyring, a prominent scientist and Sunday school general board member, welcomed evidence of evolutionary change and reiterated the teachings of Brigham Young, who taught that the gospel encompassed all truth, scientific or otherwise. In 1965, President David O. McKay worked with Bertrand F. Harrison, a botany professor at Brigham Young University, to foster greater understanding between saints with differing viewpoints on evolution. This is up there right now on the church website. You know, in the late 20th century, church-sponsored schools expanded their educational offerings in the sciences. Again, here it is. In 1992, the first presidency and board of trustees at Brigham Young University approved a packet of reading material for use in science classes. It's in here, that presented the official 1909 and 1925 statements and other statements from members of the first presidency on the faithful application of scientific truth. The packet also included an entry from the 1992 publication of the Encyclopedia of Mormonism. We went over that a little bit, produced with church leader approval, which explained that the scriptures tell why man was created, but they do not tell how. And here it is again. In 2016, the church's youth magazine published articles on pursuit of scientific truth. These articles reiterated that the church has no official position on the theory of evolution and characterized it as a matter for scientific study. So you can see that this came after that because it's quoting it and it's reiterating what it said. As to the position of the church. This is yet another place on the church's website where that official position is stated, where there is no official position. Echoing countless statements of church leaders, the articles once again affirmed God's role in creation and our relationship to our Heavenly Father as his children. So that's all I have to say.
all right.
We
Well,
need to understand each other.
that's great. I love it. And why don't you exit out real quick and we'll wrap this
Sure.
up. First of all, I just want to thank you, Ed, for coming on and
Mhm.
talking about this because you reached out to me a while back saying, "Hey, I want to address this kind of this contentiousness that's going on in your church body, and you want to really
Mhm.
call for out there to be more tolerance and understanding of people with differing views, and that's kind of what we are here at MBR. We'd like to do that." I also, when you do me a favor, some of those, if you could, so you made some
Yeah,
quotes from church websites and resources. If you could include those links and send those to me as well, I'll make
yeah,
sure those are in the description so people can look this up themselves.
sure.
I think we had a really important conversation because I do
Mhm.
think that so often you see there's demonization that does occur, and I feel like it's really important that everybody is able to get their, and there's people on the evolution side who look down on people that believe
Oh
differently.
yeah, that's a problem too, no doubt about
So
it.
I think
Yeah.
it's really important to address that and acknowledge that as well. So Ed, I'm really
Mhm.
excited to have you touched a little bit on the Book of Abraham today, kind of hinting a little
Yeah.
bit. Just
Well, yeah,
okay,
I'll just say this much. I had a different working title before, and on some of the videos on the internet that I did with other channels, I, you know, told them what that working title was at the time for this book I'm working on. It's now called, and this is, I've kind of went over this with the publisher. This seems to be the final title of the
okay.
book.
What's it
It's
called?
Ancient Enigma, Cryptograms and Cosmologies of the Book of Abraham.
Great. And that's going to be published by
So
Puddle's Digital Legends. Is that correct?
that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
we're looking for that one to come out sometime in
Mhm.
2025. And of course, we'll have you back on to talk about that, and I'm sure many other things and other subjects as well. Ed,
Yeah.
I just want to thank you so much for coming on again. I really enjoyed our previous conversation. I thought it was really good to really
Mhm.
have this back conversation, really talking about the early days of the Heartlander movement. I'm looking forward to interviewing this Saturday the backyard professor, and Jonathan Neville is going to be my special guest host, where we're going to have a talk about the early days of Fair Mormon, an oral history of Fair Mormon, which I think would be very interesting. I know you'll find that to be an interesting
Oh
conversation
yeah. Oh
as
yeah.
well.
For
So,
sure.
thanks
Mhm.
again so much, Fred, for coming on, and it
Yeah.
was a great conversation. And thank you for putting all the time and prepping it as well, folks. I would like to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what you thought about this. For those of you who are younger creationists, for those of you who believe in accept the biological evolution or evolutionists, as you call them. What are your thoughts on this as well? And for those of you who are people who believe in evolution but don't believe in God, what did you think of this conversation too? I always like to hear from all the different uh, positions out there as well. So we'll have links in the description to everything that is that Ed was talked about. He's going to send them to me, and then I will
Mhm.
make sure that that's in the description. And also, for those of you who want to financially support the channel, I do have links in the description as well. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.